Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast, presented by Exo Mountain Gear. In this episode, episode 82, we speak with Craig White from Idaho's Fish and Game Department. Craig is the program coordinator for deer and elk programs, so he has a very unique and helpful perspective to offer us on a wide variety of topics, including answering many questions that came from you when we reached out to listeners on social media and asked what you would want to know from someone like Craig. We talk a bit about how to get started in a wildlife career, such as one with a Fish and Game Department. We talk about how hunters can best use Fish and Game Department resources, including biologists and program coordinators, such as Craig, to get helpful information for their hunts. We talk about specific advice for non-resident hunters. We get into the overall outlook on deer and elk for Idaho, thoughts on regulating shed hunting seasons to manage pressure on wintering animals, a breakdown of kind of the thoughts and philosophies of a point system versus a lottery system for tag acquisition, and so much more. You guys are sure to enjoy this episode. I will say we had some quality issues with the audio at certain times, but hang in there, and thanks for sticking with us through that. It's just one of the issues we have to deal with sometimes, recording these podcasts remotely, especially with guys who are out in the field. Before we get into it, a couple things. Number one, Travis Courtney, we want to send you some Exo Mountain Gear swag for the review that you left us in iTunes. So please contact us with your shipping information. Just send us an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. Listeners, as always, if you're enjoying the show, we would love to see your review in iTunes or wherever else you might be listening to this. And you can always reach out to us by email again to podcast@exomountaingear.com with any questions, topic suggestions, or any other feedback that you have. By doing any of that, you'll be entered into these weekly giveaways as well. Finally, this episode is brought to you by Ripcord, makers of absolutely rock-solid arrow rests, such as the model that I use, the Ripcord Ace. Also, they now have the micro-adjust Ripcord Ace, which I believe is the first fall-away rest to offer micro-adjustments for both windage and elevation. I've been shooting the Ripcords for a couple of years now and absolutely love them. Incredibly easy to set up, incredibly easy to time. Ripcord, as you can see if you go look at their high-speed footage, no bounce back, incredibly consistent flight, and very, very easy to tune and avoid clearance issues. So if you guys are in the market for an arrow rest, be sure to head over to ripcordarrowrest.com and check out all the rests that they have to offer. Again, the model that I'm shooting is the Micro Ace. Okay, let's get into the show with Craig White from the Idaho Fish and Game Department. All right, well, Craig, welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. How are you tonight?
I am doing great.
Excellent. Steve, how you doing, man?
Really good, man. Looking forward to talking to Craig here and getting lowdown on Idaho Fish and Game and the decisions they make and how they manage our wildlife.
Absolutely. So to get started and get some context, Craig, you work for Idaho Fish and Game. What is your position with Idaho Fish and Game exactly?
So, Mark and Steve, I work for the game section of the Wildlife Bureau, and that's not so much important as the fact that I'm with you all today. I'm responsible for our deer and elk program coordination. Of course, it's something all Idaho Department of Fishing and hunters out there are always interested in. And so I'm appreciative that you all would invite me onto this podcast and that we could talk about deer and elk.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you get started in this career and get on board with Idaho Fish and Game? Is that something that you studied in college and things like that as a wildlife biologist, or kind of what's that context and how did you get started?
Well, it's something that, I spent a lot of time in school. Some people don't spend as much as me, but the way it worked for me is I grew up in western part of the country and actually kind of out in a pretty dry environment. And so as a kid, I was pretty lucky to chase lizards and rabbits and everything across the desert, and it just really gave me an appreciation for the outdoors. I had brothers that were big time hunters, and got to go along with them on some trips, and so just really kind of developed a passion for that. But it wasn't until I got to college and I found out I could make a career out of studying wildlife that everything really kind of came together for me. Once I discovered I could take my passion, for how things work out there, how nature works, and actually make a career studying it, I was pretty psyched.
Yeah, that's awesome. So with you, where you're at in your career these days, and obviously busy, helping to manage the deer and elk programs for wildlife, does that completely negate any hunting opportunity for you, or are you able to still get out in the field at all?
Well, that's a funny question, because I had friends in college that they talked about the reason they were going into wildlife is because they just wanted to hunt and fish all the time. And while I hadn't, I was just learning about the career too. It became pretty apparent through talking to people that have the career and doing some summer jobs that is you really love to hunt and fish, and that's the sole reason you want to go and be a wildlife biologist. It's probably the wrong career. Often our busy time is, especially the deer and elk person, is during the fall when people are out hunting deer and elk, working check stations, trying to check in with the public out there, trying to be involved in what's happening out there, and especially for our conservation officers, that's the biggest time. And so we all find a way to either kind of the slowest part of the hunting season or unique hunts or late hunts, just to find a way to get out there and stay connected with the resource, and also just with, other people that enjoy the resource, because that's a big part of it, is just serving Idaho hunters and fishermen and women and trappers. So it's needing to stay in tune by participating ourselves is very important.
Yeah, excellent. What advice would you have for someone who wanted to get into a career, pursue a wildlife career, whether that's with an agency or otherwise? Anything particular stick out in mind as advice you'd share?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One, and this is advice. So my background, just kind of follow up on one of your first questions. I got to college and earned a bachelor's, and then I went on and then 2 more graduate degrees. And one of my professors there, he gave me this bit of advice. He said, if there was only one wildlife job out there, I would go after it no matter what. And he just showed a real passion that he was going to do everything he could to work in the field, was basically his advice. And that's the first advice to anyone who wants to get into wildlife biology is, first of all, it is tough competition. Most wildlife biologists, at least for fish and game anymore, that start out in the agency in an entry-level job, have a master's. So that's 2 more years of commitment after your 4 years of a bachelor. And my advice is just be willing to stick to it and learn to be both a team player, but also be able to, show your individual skills and abilities, and just have that attitude that no matter what, you're going to be positive, and no matter what, you're going to stick to it. And really, that's advice for any aspect of life, I think.
Yeah.
The other bit of advice would be to recognize it's going to take some schooling. Don't be intimidated by it.
So before we dive into some of the Idaho-specific topics and really even get into the elk and deer specifically and kind of some of the program management aspects of that, we reached out to people who follow this podcast and asked some of the questions that they would have if we talked to someone from Idaho Fish and Game. And we have listeners from all over, not just Idaho, but from all over the West, and then even, non-resident hunters from the Midwest and out east who come out west to hunt elk and mule deer and other big game. It's often said, if someone is planning a hunt or doing some sort of scouting or trying to find a unit to go hunt in, things like that, it's often said to contact Fish and Game, in the state or in an area that you're looking to hunt. that's common advice, but I would like to ask you more specifically, what are good ways that hunters can use Fish and Game as a resource? Maybe what are some specific questions that a hunter could ask to get valuable information from, Fish and Game, whether that's a biologist or conservation officer?
Well, that's a really good question, and I do want to state that as an agency, and I know personally, I do want people to call. I can't emphasize this enough, we are here, to serve the citizens of Idaho and others that want to come and participate in hunting, fishing, and trapping in Idaho, or just want to come view wildlife. And hunters or others should not be afraid to pick up the phone and call their state agency. When they do call, each one of them is in a different situation as far as the background and knowledge and experience with both hunting and with Idaho. And one way, and that doesn't bother me at all to help them wade through that and pick out. But there's a couple resources that can help them before they ever call us, and a couple of questions they should ask. First couple of questions I always ask someone if they want to come out and find a deer or elk hunt is, what kind of experience do they want? And what I mean by that, do they want to hunt more in the backcountry? Idaho has a renowned backcountry. Many of it is in wilderness, and folks have been coming to Idaho for a long time just to have that kind of experience. And that requires a different situation as far as preparation. And they require getting with a guiding outfitter, or at least having access to stock, to horses or other stock. Or it may involve being prepared to backpack in and being in physical condition to do that. Other people want to come out and enjoy Idaho and more of what I call the front country. Those areas that aren't wilderness, that maybe have a little more road access than, say, our true backcountry or even borders some ag areas, which has more access and motels and hotels to stay in and that sort of thing. So if people can kind of figure out what kind of experience they want that way, that helps a lot before they make that call. But it's all right if they don't know. That's partially what our job is to do, is help them figure that out. Beyond that, Idaho truly offers a lot of different opportunities between over-the-counter tags and between controlled hunts. And, of course, the controlled hunts are geared more for that experience where it's going to be lower hunter densities and likely higher buck or bow numbers. And in addition, there tends to be an expectation of a quality animal, which often for some people translates into, a Boone and Crockett score type. But also that quality could just be, like I mentioned, the solitude or less hunters, meaning less, interaction with people. And whereas a general hunt, they're over the counter. People can, in the state, can always pick one of those up. And most years, non-residents can pick them up. There are times we do have a finite limit on those over the counter for non-residents, so they do need to be aware of that and pick up their tag early. Don't wait till the end. We went through a period in the 2008, 2009 where those non-resident tags weren't selling out, but anymore they are selling out. So don't, I'd say to a non-resident, don't wait till August to get it. But in addition to all that, there's things such as, youth, non-resident youth get a price break, and there's all different seasons and length of seasons to look at, as well as overlapping your deer and elk hunts in some areas. So there's all those considerations as far as the type of season and experience you want there, and even, some ways to reduce the cost for youth if you want to bring your whole family out. Some of the tools out there include a hunt planner, and I don't know if you all ever had a chance to get on that, but it's on our website, and you can go there, and you can kind of step through what I just described, or you say, all right, I want to hunt in this part of Idaho, or what kind of hunts are available in this part part of Idaho, or maybe I'll try over here, or do I want to try for antlerless or antlered, and that sort of thing. And it's a really good tool for people to explore either before they call us or even after they call us. But it provides a lot of things to look at, including drawing odds if you want to put into a control hunt, and success rates. So it's a really good tool.
That's excellent. If a hunter has a specific area in mind, so they're with intention, they've done some homework, kind of picked out a unit or region that they're looking to hunt, in that scenario, what's the best way to contact a Fish and Game resource about a particular area and maybe ask some particular questions about herd health and trophy quality and more specific things in that area?
Once again, some of that, such as quality, some rudimentary metrics are out there, such as percent 4 point and success rate, as I mentioned on the hunt counter. But once I narrowed it down to a region, I would call that region, and I'd ask for the regional wildlife manager or one of the regional population biologists. And often when I get a call into headquarters and I talk to people about kind of across the state and some of the different things they might see, but when they want to get specific, often that's what I do. I say, here's the number, and those numbers are found both on the side and the front of the regulations, all the 8 offices. When I talk to the regional wildlife manager or the regional population biologist, and then they should explain, I'm interested in hunting here. I've looked at some of the odds, or I've looked at the success rates, and this is the type of experience I'm looking for. Is if we will this area, provide that. And, our folks are always happy to help. The challenging time is if we get those in August or September. That's right to really be planning for that, and most people are scrambling so much, it's difficult for people to return those phone calls. And people should be aware of that, and then leave their name and number, because the person has other duties, and they may not be there at their office, or they may be working on something, and they'll have to go back. But people are pretty good at that, and they'll call back, and then the best time to make those calls is more like, right now, or even February, March. And then into early summer months, it'd be a good time to catch people.
All right, perfect. Could you, there's so many questions that we have personally and that our listeners have kind of asked, getting more into management of deer and elk populations. But before we get into that, I would love just to hear your perspective from your position about managing these game populations. Obviously, you're working within a state context, and as we've talked about, there's different regions, different areas, different habitat, different issues. I know you could spend, 8 hours on this, but just kind of give us a high level of what all goes into managing game from a state level, determining what is and isn't a controlled hunt, determining certain restrictions in certain areas, and kind of all those issues, again, just from that high level to set up some context for the discussion.
Well, Mark, you are right. I could and would be happy to spend 8 hours plus on this. Maybe I'm a little geek, but some of this stuff really kind of, is what motivates me. And part of that is working with people. And that's, just touch on it real quick, but going back to, what should people be aware that might want to go into this field. And one of the first things you learn in school, if you have people teaching you that have experienced actual state agency management, is that it's half of it's about working with people. Some people want to just go out there and I tended to earlier in my career too to think that it was all about just studying some problem, some wildlife issue, and finding a solution. I actually started out as a research biologist, and in my heart, I stay a research biologist. I like to explore what makes the world turn. But, the exciting part is also trying to find real-world solutions, and that involves understanding, hunters' desires and preferences. So, getting at kind of your question, as I understand it, as far as how do we go about, I guess you could say, setting the table with all the different options? Because, it really is kind of a smorgasbord table. And you can have all sorts of options out there. And it could actually be kind of overwhelming. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's what actually has a lot of, I guess you could say, strife among user groups and even, among biologists. And fortunately, in Idaho, we do have the Idaho Fish and Game Commission, which came as a result of voter initiative, the citizens of Idaho wanting to, more than 75 years ago, wanting to have kind of, the running of and setting of big game seasons and all hunting and fishing and trapping seasons independent of just total political pressure. And so that commission has a responsibility, a charge to, I guess you could say, provide opportunity for citizens of Idaho. And how that works is they give us some guidance and directions, some sideboards to work within. And for instance, I'll use an example. 4 years ago, we revised the Elk Management Plan for the state of Idaho. And what that meant is we sat down as biologists and we pulled all the data together and all the information we had as far as populations and health and how they were doing with concerns such as habitat or disease or predation. And we looked at all that, and then we went to the commission. And we said we would like to survey the public, survey hunters, and find out more about their desires, preference, attitudes, what makes hunting for them good in Idaho. And this was as much as possible an unbiased survey. It went out to thousands of people, a mail survey, as well as people could on their own. We didn't get one of the surveys in the mail could go online. And they answered some questions that let us understand what hunters want in Idaho. Now, not all hunters want the same thing. In an ideal world, we'd all, be able to harvest a big buck or big bull every year. We'd be able to hunt with just us and maybe our friends and family in 100 square miles. No one else could come into there. Obviously, could maybe go 3 or 4 months long in the season, just really relax when we do it, take our time. That doesn't work because there's a whole lot more interest and not enough space for everyone to have that kind of experience. So what we found out, though, when kind of push came to shove as we asked these questions, is that in general, Idaho hunters, the majority want to be able to hunt every year, and that's the most important thing. And it's kind of a hunt with family and friends experience, and it's more about being out there, enjoying your time with family and friends. They want to harvest, but they don't have to harvest a big bull and a big buck every year. There is a percentage of us that do want to be able to harvest a big bull, a big buck, and are more willing to give up maybe being able to hunt every year. But fortunately in Idaho, what we're able to do is evaluate populations and their ability to handle different hunting pressure and type and at the time of the year. And we've been able to build on that idea of hunting with family and friends and continue to offer a lot of general opportunities. And part of that was, going to zones back in about 1997 allowed that. So I kind of give you the background of going out to the public, and sorry, I kind of went long-winded on that, but we find out what hunters want, and then we start developing a plan that would provide that for factors and some sideboards that the commission has given us. And that plan then was reviewed by the public, and it could give us more feedback. The commission would give us feedback and further guidance as we went along, and eventually that plan was approved by the commission, and then it's our job to carry out that plan. Now, the plan is not prescriptive in the sense it doesn't say we're going to have 2/3 of the state look like this and 1/3 look like that. It's not that prescriptive, but it does give us the general guidelines of provide, hunting for family and friends, and also evaluate and let the public know those areas that are going to be managed for more of a quality experience, where there's going to be some kind of cap so that you can have higher bull-to-cow numbers and you can have lower hunter density.
Within that plan, you said it's not prescriptive. So how does it work out in terms of Idaho Fish and Game having the freedom to be sort of nimble and make decisions or modify certain parameters or quotas from year to year? How does that play out, since the plan gives kind of a direction but isn't prescriptive in terms of implementation?
Well, great question, Mark, and that's one thing from a model of carrying out a business of managing fish and wildlife for hunters. I think we have to be smart and nimble. While the plan isn't always prescriptive right down to the T, it did establish in 18 in the instance of elk. There's 28 elk zones, and it actually looked at, we had 29 before this plan revision. And in this example being nimble, we realized one of those zones really was two different populations. And so we reconfigured that to be hunting a little better experience and a little better managing the population. The other way it does is, I said it gives us those guidelines. It does talk about in the plan, here's this zone's objectives. About 18 of those zones we can fly with a helicopter and do an aerial survey and get an estimate of the population. And so we have objectives set on what the population size will be. And it does have prescriptions on how we need to get there if we're not there, or how we need to stay within those, or what we need to do to reduce some of those populations if we're over objective and they're causing agricultural impacts agricultural land. And there are some, specific steps in there to be prescriptive, but it doesn't say that, for instance, Hell's Canyon necessarily has to stay a general hunt. Has to stay a controlled hunt forever. At the same time, though, it does say that in Hell's Canyon the desire is for a quality experience, and with the habitat and level of productivity in there that we've seen in the past, and those type of measurements, we know that we can't just offer a general hunt and have the same number of bulls per 100 cows. There would be too much pressure. There'd be too much vulnerability of those bulls because of the habitat type and terrain, even though it's very steep. And as a result of that, we would quickly lower bull to cow ratios, and that would no longer, for many hunters, be considered a quality experience. And so it does talk about this type of zone being a quality or having a high quality experience, while this zone, due to its proximity, such as the Boise River zone, we strive to provide as much over-the-counter opportunity, general hunting as possible, because it's close to the largest population base of Idaho. It's a big zone, relatively speaking. The population has shown an ability over the last 20 to 30 years to respond to different landscape changes, and has grown to the point where actually we're over population objectives right now, and that we would continue to provide a general framework, although, there are some, I guess you could say, trigger points where if we saw bull to cow ratios really change in a way we wouldn't, declining number of bulls to cows, that we'd have to consider, other season adjustments.
Idaho, as you mentioned, is clearly managed in many ways, and as you mentioned, this is based largely off hunter feedback as well, but it's managed in many ways for opportunity. In terms of the controlled hunts, though, there has been discussion of kind of moving away from the lottery system and implementing some point of, or some version of a point structure. Kind of give us the breakdown on that and where you see that headed in the future.
Well, there has been some requests in the past. Can Idaho go to a draw system or a point system? And the department's evaluated that at the direction of the Idaho Fish and Game Commission. And if I recall, it's kind of twice came up in about the last 10 years. And the department actually put together a presentation that I believe if you Google YouTube videos and look for Idaho Department of Fish and Game and either the drawing or bonus points type of search, you'll come up with those. And very well put together. And basically, what it says and shows is that when you start down that road of a bonus point system, part of the idea is that over time everyone would get a chance to eventually draw a tag, and that's correct. But there's some trade-offs. So let's use Unit 45 for instance. Unit 45 deer hunt, controlled hunt, very coveted deer hunt, maybe the most coveted, hardest to draw in the state. And it is true. Here's the, I guess, pros and cons depending on how you want to look at it. Every year you put in for it, you have the same drawing odds as somebody else. If we looked at this mathematically over a person's, over a 30-year period, one could, one should have the chance at a random draw of drawing that once in their lifetime. Now that's chance, and chance is a fickle thing. And so somebody might draw it 2 or 3 times, or another person at 30 still may not have drawn it. But you have an equal chance of drawing it over a 30-year period as someone else. Under a draw system, under a bonus system, we crunch the numbers. And essentially, if you started a bonus system today, the person would have a chance of drawing that once in 30 years. So under a bonus system and under current just random drawing, the person, in theory, has a chance of drawing it at least once in 30 years. A bonus system, in theory, guarantees that, no matter what, by year 30. But that only works for people who start to play the game the first year. In other words, what other states have found is they start down this road with a bonus point system. And so, and I'm just going to make up some random numbers. 10,000 people started in the game of playing the bonus point system. And of those 10,000, in theory, if every year they put it for Unit 45 over some period, they will eventually die. And pretty soon you get new recruits playing the game, whether it's someone who is now 14 trying to play the game. The odds change for them. So the initial people that started, in 30 years they might draw Unit 45 once. But those people that are starting to play the game 4 or 5 or 6 years, or even 2 years after the game starts, suddenly their odds go. They might draw. It might take them 45 years. And what they see is what they call bonus creep. And pretty soon, it's not just you on 30 years. It might be 45 or 50. And every one of those states, if you follow them, have all gone back and tried to adjust how the game is played, trying to lower that back down. But once you start down that game, you really can't ever make an adjustment to get it back to what the original odds were. And so there's always going to be people that essentially, if you were a 60-year-old man or woman when you started playing that game, or you came in 5 years later, you would never draw it in your lifetime. For some people, that's okay. They like that. But when we've gone out and surveyed, Idaho hunters, it's not, it's not a clear, 100% wanted this way and zero don't. But for the most part, it has always been split or a slight majority, or even higher sometimes, depending on what the audience is, that says we'd rather keep our chances the same every year. Every year we'd like the same chance. And we'll take our chance, and we recognize that as long as we play in there consistently, we have a pretty good chance of someday pulling it without ever going to a bonus system. Now, that's not to say there won't be that one unlucky person that 30 or 40 years playing it would never draw. But over time, it should work out. And what is for sure, though, is a bonus system over time has that inflation, has that increase, where, if you started playing the game the first time it's ever created, in 30 years, you'd get again a 45, but if you started 5 or 10 years later, it might be 45 or 50 years. And those aren't exact numbers, but my point is to emphasize that, a couple things. We've surveyed the public, and there's a fair amount that like the system the way it is. And every time it came before the commission, which is the decider on this, they have decided to leave it as is, and that a bonus point system doesn't solve the problem as far as making sure people are going to get an opportunity because of that bonus creep changes over time and becomes bigger.
If one is an advocate for the current system in the lottery and is not wanting to see a bonus system implemented, what's the best way that they can sort of champion that cause? Is it simply to make their voice heard when the commission asks for feedback and attend meeting, things like that?
Oh yeah, Mark, it is. And so, on questions like this, we both try and do a survey where, kind of a blind survey, you could say, where we just pull hunters' names from our database and send them a mail survey or send them an email and say, go on and take this survey, because, that's kind of a blind approach to it. We're not, biasing it towards, maybe 10 people that come in. At the same time, those 10 people that come in, they are passionate, and we do that does have an impact when you do come in and attend the commission meeting. Every time the commission has a meeting the night before, there's a public hearing part of it where they sit there and you have an opportunity to come up, and you usually get 3 minutes to express yourself on some topic, whether it's going to be something they're going to act on or talk about the next day, or whether it's something that's not even on their agenda for that meeting. Also, when we set seasons, we, one or the other, whether it's an open house or whether it's online, we give folks a chance to let their voice be heard. And it's important that they do that because, like I said, we both want to kind of do a blind test to see what people's responses are, but we also, that passionate person coming in, it does have an impact, and it's important that if you have an opinion one way or the other, for gets bonus points or whatever the issue is, that you take the time, even if it's just an email. And that's one thing you mentioned, both on having your voice heard on a topic, but also getting to know the local conservation officer or the biologist or the regional wildlife manager. It's important to build a relationship with them, and so whether it's to find out about a hunting area or if it's just to find out about an issue, take the time to come in when there isn't an issue, or something pressing, and just say, hey, I just want to take a few minutes and introduce myself. This is who I am. This is what I like to experience in Idaho, and build a relationship so that when there is a time where there's something passionate out there that you feel passionate about, an issue out there, they already know a little bit about who you are and can recognize you when you come in the door.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. So as the kind of the program manager, I would love to hear, and again, another 8-hour discussion topic, I'm sure, but I would love to hear your outlook heading into the 2017 seasons for deer and elk. And obviously there's different issues in different areas, but speaking of the Idaho and the hunting seasons quickly approaching, really, give us kind of an overview of some of the deer and elk populations, any issues, whether that's fire issues, winter kill, anything like that, and kind of the overall outlook for the upcoming hunting season.
Well, we definitely had a winter this year that we haven't seen for a number of years, and there was impacts. We certainly haven't wanted to sugarcoat that. So part of what how we respond and the work we do for hunters out there is each end of December, January, for 18 years now, we've gone out and caught mule deer fawns. And we put radio collars on these fawns that allows us to monitor their movements and their survival and determine cause of death when it does happen. And there's over this past year, there was over 8 areas that we have been collaring, that we collared fawns, and we've been doing this for over 18 years now. Usually for around 8 to 10 areas that we collared fawns, and we have a total of about 10 to 12 areas that we have also in the process over time, radio marked does. And so we're monitoring the winter survival. And that's one thing that really kind of impacts, is an immediate impact on what hunters are going to see in the fall, is how well those fawns survive. Those fawns, after they hit May, they're recruited into the adult population, and that's the yearlings that are going to be out in the fall. And what we saw this year was a winter that really, once it decided to turn into winter in December, most part of the state, it really hit hard, and it was deep, and it impacted deer's mobility and being able to get to forage, and then it kind of just kept up for a while. And as a result of that, at one point this winter, we were looking at the lowest survival of fawns that we've seen in 18 years. Mid-March, first part of April, started letting up, and right now we're projected to have the 4th lowest fawn survival in 18 years. So it's kind of moderated a little bit at the end of the season, although we've still got a couple more weeks to go to really say, we're in the books. These are now adults. But this will go down as one of our lowest survival years. And there's a couple areas in the state that were hit the hardest. Certainly over in the southeast corner of the state, we're down to basically 89% mortality, or in other words, 11% survival of fawns over there. In the Weasel-McCall area, we had 3% survival of fawns. These were the 2 hardest hit areas of the state. The Boise River area is 34% survival. On an average winter like last year, that's typically somewhere in the 60% survival. So even areas that weren't hit as hard, still certainly were below average winter. Overall, statewide, of all the fawns we've been monitoring, we're at a 33% survival. And typical average winter, at least average for the last 18 years, would be usually somewhere between 58 to 55% survival is kind of an average. So you can see we're, basically half of what an average winter would do. The good news, the silver lining in this, is our adult survival. Adult survival has held up well. We're at 90% survival statewide. There are, some areas that, such as over in that southeast corner, where it's only 78% survival. We even recall only 86% survival. Normally, in an average winter, you're somewhere, north of 92 to 93%, maybe somewhere between 92 to 96, 95%. So, on average, we're a little lower, but, statewide 90% for the type of winter we've had, not horrific. But there are areas, like I mentioned, where adult survival coupled with fawn survival means that we're not recruiting fawns into the population to replace does that were lost this winter and that we lost a few more does than average. But probably the best news in regard to that is we had one of these winters in 2010, 2011. So it is the worst fawn survival on record. And ever since then, we've had mild to even the best two winter survival on record since then. So winter 2014 and 2015, as well as the winter of 2013 and 14 were exceptionally mild winters. Some of our highest survival ever, upwards of 80%. And so what I'm saying is we've experienced a bad winter before, and new deer populations do that. And the last one we really experienced is 2010 and 2011. And then we've had some high survival of fawns, high survival of does, and we grew deer. We have been growing deer the last couple, 4 or 5 years, since 2010, 2011. And so even though this winter was a tough one, we lost some fawns and some does in some areas, our population was highest it's been in 5 years, and it can handle this winter. Next year is always the wild card. What will it bring? But based on weather patterns, you'd expect an average winter, a very mild winter, and we expect these populations within a year or 2 or 3 to bounce back. And part of that is the reason they'll bounce back so well is because of that both means that we have a lot of 2, 3, and 4-year-old deer out. A lot of them survive from fawns into adults, and one of those teams that are 2, 3, 4, that's the prime productive age. They're primed to bounce back very quickly because a lot of the deer population is now a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old. On the doe side, female side is prime age animals that are likely with a decent summer and mild winter. We will to growth continue and read those areas.
Speaking of difficult winters, as this past one was, we saw several states throughout the West put a ban on shed hunting or, more heavily regulate that than normal. I'm curious from your position, what are your thoughts on shed hunting as that's become more and more popular, and how do you foresee that pressure being managed on wintering animals in the future?
it was a concern from our regions, especially those regions that border other states where shed hunting was closed. They felt like they saw an influx of people. Our commissioners were concerned about it. We looked at the rules that other states have implemented, and then also evaluated by law what authority the legislature has given the commission in that regards. It is, as you know, legal to pick up a shed from an elk. It is even legal to pick up antler, still attached to the skull, what some people call deadhead, as long as that animal was believed to have died of natural causes. And any more of that even includes, being hit by a vehicle. There is the road salvage rule. The only time you can't legally pick up that animal is if it was believed to have been poached or harvested. So we looked at that situation, and some states have certainly took those steps. Our initial assessment from a law enforcement standpoint, being able to enforce that law, was that it could be a very difficult law to enforce. Let me give you an example. It doesn't stop. Fish and Game has the authority to manage wildlife in the state. The belief that the wildlife belongs to the state for the benefit of the state and its citizens. And so we can certainly, the commission, through law, certainly has the ability to set regulations and seasons and to establish proper hunting rules and enforcement of those. But the very act of just walking on public land, or if it's your own private land, Fish and Game has no authority over. The Fish and Game Commission has no authority over whether you can go out and walk on BLM land or Forest Service land or public land. And even if you implement a law that says there will be no shed hunting between, say, January 1st and April 31st or whatever, it doesn't stop people from choosing to go out and walk on that land, recreate on that land, walk their dog on that land, and if so it wasn't going to stop the activity. Land managers, and that's where we've tried to focus on, is just working with land managers, whether that be state, federal, or whoever, to implement closures, which would be all recreation closure. In other words, someone out snowmobiling in the dead of winter, where wildlife's wintering or walking their dog. From a wildlife health standpoint, it'd be just as important to limit that behavior as someone out, looking for sheds, because all the behavior is going to have an impact. And so it's one of those things where quick implementation of a rule preventing shed hunting didn't appear to, immediately solve the fact that people could still be out there and disturbing wildlife. And to some extent, there's, I think from my perspective, the decision then was let's, work with land managers, and also let's continue the discussion and continue to talk to hunters to see what solutions might be out there. So I don't know that this discussion, this is, up to the commission, but I don't know if this is a discussion that will stop. It may very well continue. That's a decision ultimately for the commission if they want to look at rulemaking for that. But sometimes the best solution, even though we get impatient, is to really analyze a situation, turn it over, look at it different ways, and then involve the public in trying to find some solutions. So I don't think this thing is done, that it's over with. It may continue at some future points in the discussions, but those are some of the challenges with implementing a ban on shed hunting, is it doesn't stop people from being out there recreating in other ways. And that's, kind of a big discussion of values, and certainly, Fish and Game is not trying to I guess you could say, force values on to people. Fish and Game is here to hear people's values and discuss them and find some solutions that work for Idahoans.
Steve, is a resident and somebody's been hunting Idaho for years. What questions do you have?
I have this long list, and we've covered quite a few of them. I'm definitely one of the people out there that is a huge fan of Fish and Game. I love how, it's clearly managed for opportunity and not for trophies. Huge fan of not having a bonus or preference point system. I mean, just as Craig was talking about, it just goes downhill from day one, and really just hurts everybody in the long run. It's kind of selfish, I think, to push for one on year one when I think about my daughter, and she probably would never be able to draw that tag if they implemented something like that. One of the things I love is for our trophy species that you can only put in for one animal at a time, and I think that really, I'd actually like to see something like that even for elk and deer, because it just decreases or increases the draw odds, decreases the amount of people putting in for each tag, and I think it's just a good way to do it. One thing, Craig, is that it's been a hot topic, is that all the cow elk tags added to the Pioneer Zone this year, and obviously with the winter kill, people have been kind of upset about that. Can you provide some insight there?
Yes, so just make sure. So your question was what about tags have been added to, was it the Pioneer Zone?
Yeah, it was. I believe it's like 2,000 tags or something.
Yeah. So no, and I'm glad you brought that up, Steve. So kind of backtrack. I gave you a scenario with deer, and deer are more susceptible to winter than elk. We did lose some fawns. We did lose some calves. Sorry, elk calves. We're running about 50. We color them as well, elk calves and cows. And for this particular type of monitoring, we've only been doing it for 3 years. We colored elk, cows, and calves, and even bulls in the past in a lot of different areas, but not in the manner that we're doing it now to monitor survival and kind of predict a hunting opportunity, so to speak, in the fall. It's been a project. We've been at it for 3 years, but calf survival across the state where we've been doing it is 54%. So the calves were impacted, not as much as fawns, but they've been impacted in areas. Interesting enough, again, in the southeast part of the state, Diamond Creek Zone, 44% calf survival, so below the average for statewide. And then the Sawtooth Zone, which has gotten pretty popular, is only 22% survival. And these are areas that, will kind of lose that calf cohort, just like we're losing that fawn cohort from mule deer in a lot of areas. But overall, animals, elk fared better, and cow survival is 96%. And just like deer, where we've been growing deer for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been growing a lot of elk. And elk, just bigger bodied, larger animals. Calves, themselves are about the size of are bigger than often, a deer. And so, they just tend to do better and have less impacts from winter. And the Pioneer Zone itself is an area where I mentioned we have, numerical objectives, the number of cows and bulls for a zone, and we're over our objectives in the Pioneers. And I know there's some hunters and would like to just say, well, let's keep going. Let's just keep going with higher numbers. And I can certainly understand that feeling. At the same time, once we get to certain objectives, we see increases in damage to agricultural land and property. And by law, by state law, we are responsive to that. And we want to be responsive to that. One thing that I hope every hunter and every landowner out there has is an appreciation for each other. Idaho's almost 70% public land, but that does mean 30% of it's private. And of that 30% that's private, a good chunk of that is prime agricultural land, which, is areas where deer and elk winter. And we have some zones that, heavily depend on, wintering range that is near or adjacent or sometimes even on private land. And we, as hunters, need to work with landowners to find workable solutions for all. And many of the landowners are hunters themselves. And so in the Pioneer Zone, we have seen increases, just like we have around the Boise River Zone, increases in damage to private land, and we need to reduce those population, particularly the cow segment of the population. And winter typically doesn't do that. Like I mentioned, even in this quote very tough winter on mule deer, we're running 96% cow survival across the state, and so. Cows do very well in winter, and that doesn't mean we won't see some out there that are on the hillside that die, and there's always exceptions, herds that, are not in the best health or whatever, that lose a little more. But overall, they've thrived, and even in this winter, we're going to carry cows through, and we're objective. And that was why we're even offering more cow opportunities, is to try and lower that segment of the population closer to our objectives. The females, sorry to all the guys out there, but females do drive the population, and we need to stem the direction that population is headed, and try and reduce some of those agricultural impacts.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. How about one other question I had was on the sawtooth tag, just selling out since you guys have capped it. Do you see a future solution for that works? I mean, I'm afraid it's going to turn into a draw hunt. What do you think is going to happen with that in the future?
That very question, and asked hunters, because we heard a lot. I mean, it's people didn't like standing in line and having somebody behind them actually get the tag because they were on their phone doing it online while the person stood in line at Walmart or our office or wherever. And that was very frustrating to people. And there's not the good news is that zone is below objective and has been for over 10 years, but we've been implementing a few actions, including a predation management plan, and working on a few things, and we have seen increases in that population. Now, they're not at objectives yet. They're not at the minimum objective yet, but we have seen increases. And with those increases, people they've noticed it on the hillside. It's one thing for us to say, oh, there's more elk out there or less, but, until people notice it on the hillside, and it's not always a one-to-one relation. In other words, I could tell you there's another 100 elk or 1,000 elk out there, but, it doesn't mean necessarily you're going to see 100 or 1,000 more elk out there, because they're darn good at hiding, right? And when I count them, I have the advantage of being the helicopter above them and on winter range. And so it doesn't always translate immediately into hunters seeing it. Well, hunters are seeing it in the sawtooth. They are experiencing seeing younger bulls over the last 4 or 5 years, and pretty good success rates, to tell you the truth. Really good success rates.
Yeah.
And also because it's capped, lower hunter density. And so it really has been a fun experience. Now, it's not what it was 20 or 30 years ago, because we still aren't in our objectives. And 20 or 30 years ago we were, and had those kind of numbers. So we went to the public and said, look, we can leave this zone as capped and just try and manage how you get a tag, how we administer tags, because that's really what we were hearing. People were frustrated with how the tags were administered. Or we could go to to a controlled hunt, and essentially have the same number of tags out there, but have it in a controlled hunt, which is one way to administer the tags differently. And surprisingly, I think to some, what we heard back is, well, actually the majority would rather leave it capped. Administering tags still gets pretty difficult, so the approach that we've taken this year for residents is those tags will go on sale July 12th. Other cap zones go on sale July 10th, so you won't have to wait in line with someone who's trying to get a tag for another cap zone or go online and compete. So it'll just be the sawtooth tags on July 12th. And we're going to take, I think it's half of those tags, and it may not be quite half, but we're going to take a portion of those tags, and they're going to be available, I believe it's at 10 o'clock, for sale at vendors, so your Walmarts, your Cabela's, Sportsman's Warehouse, and our offices are going to be on sale at 10. And so person that feels like, a way for them, best way for them to get a tag, if they like the idea of going and standing in line, they can do that at 10. For those folks who say, hey, they should have just been all online, the rest of those tags will go on sale. I believe it's at noon on that day to be sold online. So we are kind of splitting the two user groups, because that's primarily how those tags purchase, is either in line, standing at a counter, or online through the computer, and people have preferences. It might not surprise you usually if it has to do with their age, but they will have an option to try and get a tag based on what preference they would like to try. And
gotcha.
It's not perfect, but the good news is the reason it's not perfect, and the reason we're hearing about it, is because things are better in the sawtooth, and that is good news.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good. I guess it's good to hear that your guys' perspective on it, and that I and probably most hunters didn't realize that it's below objective, and that you're still trying to build that back up. And I guess hopefully, you guys you're managing it so that, like the Pioneer, hopefully maybe 2 years down the road, we don't need those 2,000 tags anymore, and they can cut those away. And hopefully down the road, you do get objectives over objective in the sawtooth, and can make that just a general tag again.
Well, and that's one thing that, you talk long range, that's what we hope. We've been growing by, a couple percentage on average a year. Like I said, unfortunately, this winter won't help us with recruitment. They did not do well there, and that generally speaks towards a summer-fall habitat issue. And if anyone who's driven along the South Fork of the Payette, you've probably noticed a lot of the invasive weeds, and so the winter range has been a challenge there for years, being taken over by rust skeleton and other stuff that just isn't helpful. But yeah, long term, we hope to we want to get into objectives. I think once we get into objectives, we can start talking about some other management season structures. I don't want to give the impression that once we're in objectives, we can just turn it over to a general hunt. I mean, that may happen, but I think the public will want to evaluate, hunters will want to evaluate their options at that time. The reason I say that is because We used to harvest, well over 600 bulls in the sawtooth zone. And of course, that includes 36, and which actually is an area that draws elk from a lot of different areas. They come up from the South Fork of the Payette, they come down the Middle Fork, they come from kind of the Salmon side and from the White Cloud side, and even, from the Smoky Bennett side. And so some of that fluctuates just depending on what the other herds are doing, not just the wintering herd that winters in Unit 33 and 35. But my point is we even used to harvest upwards to 800 bulls, and Boise's changing, and the surrounding area is changing, and people from all over, hunt that zone. People from Boise, people from Magic Valley, from Idaho Falls, and my point is just this. Depending on what hunters want, once we get into objectives, we still may need to be creative with the seasons and not just go to an over-the-counter hunt, or I could imagine that we would soon see 7,000 to 10,000 hunters in there again. Back in the early 2000s, that's how many we had. We had about 7,000 hunters in that zone, where now we have 2,000. Do we want 5,000 more hunters hunting in that zone, or do we want to take some incremental steps and kind of ease up into it, raise the cap levels? Or do we want to, at some point, still manage at a lower number and less bull harvest, so that herd can continue to kind of maintain itself in objectives by doing something different? Maybe making the archery tag the A zone and the A tag a unlimited first choice only controlled hunt, which still allows family and friends to hunt together. There's no limit on the number of hunters, but it may create, some people may choose that they'd rather put in for a different controlled hunt and not spend their controlled hunt on an unlimited first choice only, because that is a commitment early to go there and not put in for a controlled hunt. That might be an option. One thing that we had to do in Unit 39, that hunt is in November 1st through November 9th for the B tag. It used to be in the October time period, but with the human population and the pressure it was receiving, in order to leave it as a general hunt, it was felt by the manager some time ago to move it into November. It made it a less desirable hunt being in November, and somewhat of a difficult hunt because snow and other things can impact it over even at the success rate stint, but the overall harvestage is because there's so many more hunters to create problems. Moving it into November has allowed it to stay a general hunt, and as I mentioned, we've even increased population. Maybe the sawtooths will have to have some kind of season structure for the B tag if people want it to eventually be less limited with the number of hunters, either a general hunt or a large cap. These are all options, and there's other options, and goes back to that excitement. This is where it gets exciting when we built relationships with hunters such as yourself and Mark, and we can start to really draw stuff up on the board and say what will work for people. And hunters have a lot of good ideas, and we're at our best. We're at our best nimble and smart agency when we involve hunters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's just good to hear, from a fishing game representative that, you guys are absolutely, on our side and using, science and data to make your decisions. And I think people get frustrated when they see something they don't like and just kind of, vent on Facebook or something like that. But I think, you guys are obviously doing the best you can, and hunters are the first person you're thinking about.
Well, I hope it is, and I can't say that we're perfect at that. Sometimes we fall short, and sometimes it's frustrating for a hunter because they know what their opinion is, and they don't always get to see that we heard 50 other voices, and they were all different, or they were all in opposition to what that one hunter had, or sometimes it's 25 and 25, and we're just doing our best to use, like you said, the data and science and what will work to provide some of these bigger picture items, family and friend hunting. It's tough. Hunters want to know, why can't it be fair? And I like to tell my kids, that's a 4-letter F word. And fair is always in the eyes of the beholder. What is fair to me may not be fair to you. And but I think by and large, we hopefully respond to hunters' desires and interests, put forth seasons and frameworks that provide those bigger guidance that we do hear from them, hunting with family and friends. Some controlled hunt opportunities without making the whole state that way, and leave it up to the commission, who also is hearing, from constituents to, make that ultimate decision on where a season is going and what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap up, Craig. We've certainly benefited from having a good chunk of your evenings. We appreciate you joining us.
Well, once again, I really do appreciate it. This is a great forum for us to be able to, have a conversation. And one thing, I don't know that I really hit on it well, and let me just, because I do want to make sure we're transparent about what we expect this fall from a hunting standpoint. So, I think it'll be noticeable out there for hunters that there are fewer yearlings, especially in the Weiser McCall area and the southeast part of the state, and in several areas north of the Snake River. It will be tough. We did see decent to really good survival in our Smoky Bennetts was decent, and really good survival in our South Hills. So, not all deer herds were impacted the same. Northern Idaho had a winter, but it was much more on the long-term average, snowpack. And so whitetails have done really well. We have had some of the best mule deer hunting the last 3 years. In fact, it's the highest 3-year average since the early 90s. And since we started splitting out whitetail and mule deer hunting statistics, as far as number of deer by species harvested, the last 3 years are our best whitetail deer harvest ever on record. And that goes back to 1975 period when we started splitting out whitetail for mule deer harvest. I think whitetails will be just fine up north. I think yearlings will be, for mule deer, will be obviously will be sparse and scarce in a lot of areas, and that will be noticed because yearlings, like I said, often make up the biggest age segment of the population. The good news is adult does survive well in many places, and that while it was does collared, that often translates to similar survival for bucks, and so there should be there's a lot they're heading into this winter. There's a lot of 2, 3, 4, and even year-old bucks out there because of that growth, high fawn survival the last 3 to 5 years, and I think they'll come through just fine. So there's should be some good segment out there of adults and a healthy segment, but it will be noticed, particularly in those areas with the lowest fawn survival. And I just want people to be aware of that and understand that, but also understand that we're poised to bounce back with some mild winters. Elk hunting, again, there'll be some areas with fewer yearlings, and that'll be noticed, just like it will with mule deer. But the adult segment is very strong and has grown a lot, and especially in some of those kind of ag front country areas.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much, Craig, for joining us. Really appreciate the time.
Well, I appreciate it too.
Well, that is a wrap on this one. As always, guys, we really do thank you so much for tuning in. So the fact that you subscribe, the fact that you tune in, the fact that you send in your feedback is what keeps us going. Again, reach out at any time to podcast@exomountgear.com, or if you're enjoying the show, be sure to leave us a review in iTunes or wherever else you might be listening to this. Check out all of the episodes and go subscribe by visiting exomountgear.com/podcast.